My name is Irene Willette and I'm 32 years old, and 5 years ago my life changed because of one lie my sister told my parents, that I had quit medical school, which was never true. That false story was enough for my family to completely shut me out. They stopped answering my calls, blocked my number, missed my residency graduation, and didn't attend my wedding, leaving me to live for years feeling like I no longer had parents. Then just last month, everything came full circle when my sister was rushed into the emergency room in critical condition, and the trauma team urgently called for the chief surgeon. When my mother saw the name on the white coat approaching her daughter's bed, she froze and clutched my father in shock. Before I continue, take a second to like and subscribe if this story connects with you, and share your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're watching from right now. Let me take you back to the fall of 2019 to a kitchen table in Hartford, Connecticut, and the last moment my father ever looked at me with pride. Growing up in our home, there were two daughters, but it always felt like only one truly mattered. My older sister Monica, 3 years ahead of me, confident, outgoing, and always the center of attention at school events and family gatherings. My parents, Jerry and Diane Willette, hardworking middle-class people from Hartford, valued image and obedience above everything else. And Monica fit that mold perfectly while I stayed quiet, buried in science books, unnoticed and overlooked. I wasn't rebellious or troublesome. I simply blended into the background, which hurts in a different way than being openly rejected. I remember one clear moment in 8th grade when I qualified for the state science fair, the only student from my school, but my parents chose to attend Monica's local theater show instead. When I came home with a second-place ribbon, my father barely glanced at it and made a brief comment without asking what I had worked so hard on, and I learned to tell myself that I didn't need praise. I focused all my energy on school, advanced classes, and college applications, believing that if I couldn't be the daughter they noticed, I would become the one they couldn't overlook. For a short time that plan worked. When I was accepted into Oregon Health and Science University's medical program, thousands of miles from home, something finally changed, and for the first time in my life, my father truly looked at me and said the words I had waited 18 years to hear. A moment that made every sacrifice feel worth it. I'll get to the rest soon. But first you need to understand what changed when Monica sensed the attention shifting away from her. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in April, and I remember it clearly because Monica was visiting that weekend. She was 22 then, working as a marketing coordinator at a decent firm in Stamford, living what most people would call a comfortable, average life, even if she never liked that description. My father read the letter aloud at the kitchen table, paused, and slowly said the name of the school as if it carried real weight, then looked at me and said something close to praise, awkward, restrained, but enough that I clung to it like it mattered. That night my mother called relatives, friends, even neighbors, telling them I'd been accepted into medical school with a tone I'd never heard before, a kind of pride that felt new and startling. Across the dinner table Monica smiled, but it was tight and careful, and while I didn't recognize it then, I now know she was watching, adjusting, and taking notes. After that she started calling me often, asking about my plans, my classes, the people in my life, remembering details with surprising interest, and I truly believed she was finally seeing me as an equal. I shared everything, thinking we were building a real bond, not realizing I was giving away more than I should have. By my 3rd year, life took a hard turn when my closest friend and roommate, Sarah Mitchell, the person who had supported me through my toughest early days, became seriously ill with no family to help her. When my own family brushed off my stress yet again, it was Sarah who reminded me to keep going and focus on what mattered. When her condition worsened, I followed the proper process, spoke with the dean, and was officially approved for a temporary leave to care for her, with all paperwork completed and my place in the program secured. I moved into her spare room, drove her to treatments, stayed beside her during long nights in the hospital, and did everything I could to support her, believing I was doing the right thing both as a future doctor and as a human being. I called Monica to explain everything, and even now I'm not sure why. Maybe part of me still believed she was the sister she had been acting like. I told her about my friend, about taking an approved leave, and about my plan to return to school in the spring, and she responded with a soft, comforting voice, saying she was sorry and promising she wouldn't say anything to our parents. 3 days later she did exactly the opposite. I didn't learn the full details of what she told them until years later, but the impact was immediate and devastating. That night, while I was sitting beside my friend in the hospital, my phone rang and my father's voice was cold and distant as he accused me of quitting school and lying to them. I tried to explain, asked what evidence they had, and offered documents and contacts to prove the truth, But they refused to listen, saying Monica had warned them I'd have an excuse ready. When my mother took the phone, her voice shook with anger and disappointment, and before I could finish pleading, my father ended the call and told me not to contact them again until I was honest. In just over 4 minutes, I was cut out of their lives completely. Shortly after, Monica sent a short message saying she was sorry and that she couldn't keep my secret. A message that felt empty and calculated rather than caring. I was thousands of miles from home, nearly out of money and suddenly without a family. I didn't give up easily. I called repeatedly, sent emails with official paperwork attached, shared names and numbers of people who could confirm everything, and even mailed a handwritten letter explaining it all. None of it mattered. Every attempt was ignored, my numbers were blocked, and the letter eventually came back unopened, my mother's handwriting on the envelope making it painfully clear that they had chosen to believe a lie over me. I reached out to Aunt Ruth, my father's younger sister, the only relative who had ever treated me as if I truly mattered, and she immediately tried to step in. She called my dad that same evening, but when she called me back less than an hour later, I could hear the weight in her voice as she explained that he had shut her down and told her to stay out of it, saying I had made my own choices. Ruth tried to explain about my approved leave from school, but he ended the call without listening. In less than a week I had tried everything, 14 calls, multiple emails, a letter, and even asking someone else to speak for me, and every attempt was ignored, blocked, or sent back. That's when I understood this wasn't a sudden misunderstanding, but a lifelong pattern coming to its harshest conclusion. Every time my achievements were overlooked, every event they skipped, and every moment when my sister's version of events was believed over mine, all of it led to this. On the 6th day I stopped calling not because I didn't care, but because I finally saw that their decision had been made long before this happened. When Sarah passed away quietly one December morning, I was the only person with her, and my family never knew because no one was listening anymore. I arranged a small service with just a handful of people who truly cared, and I stood in a nearly empty chapel to speak about her life without shedding a tear, feeling completely drained. That night, alone in the apartment we had shared, I found a handwritten note she had left inside a textbook, encouraging me to finish my journey and not let anyone define my worth. With that message in mind, I reopened my application, chose to move forward, and returned to medical school in January, determined to honor her belief in me and the person I was becoming. That I had no family backing and no safety net, so I did whatever it took to survive, taking on extra student loans, working part-time as a research assistant, and getting by on leftover meals from the hospital more times than I care to remember. Medical school doesn't slow down for personal pain. Exams still come, long shifts still stretch on, and no one shortens a rotation because you broke down in the early hours of the morning. At some point I stopped falling apart and focused entirely on moving forward, working relentlessly because my future depended on it. I finished school on schedule, even though no one from home showed up, and matched into a demanding surgical residency at Mercy Rest Medical Center, one of the busiest trauma centers in Connecticut. That's where I met Dr. Margaret Thornton, a strong, no-nonsense leader who became both my mentor and the steady support I had been missing for years. During my residency, I met Nathan Caldwell, a civil rights attorney with a calm presence who listened to my story without judgment and simply told me I deserved better, words that stayed with me. We married in a small ceremony surrounded by people who truly cared, including Aunt Ruth, while another unopened invitation returned from Hartford. Over time, I grew into someone stronger and more grounded than I ever imagined, building a fulfilling life with a loving partner, meaningful work, and a quiet sense of peace. Still, there's an ache that never fully disappears, especially during holidays when the absence of family is felt in small, silent ways. Aunt Ruth remains my connection to that past, calling every week, and while I never ask about the others, I listen when she chooses to share, knowing some wounds heal slowly and some simply change shape. My parents are still in good health, and Monica divorced 2 years ago and now works selling medical equipment, an irony that hasn't escaped me. But last week Aunt Ruth called sounding careful and uneasy, telling me there was something troubling I needed to know about Monica. Before she could explain, my hospital pager went off for an emergency case, and I told her I'd call back, never realizing that what she was trying to warn me about was already unfolding and heading straight toward me. Within a short time, that warning would arrive at my hospital with my parents nearby and my name already tied to the situation, though I had no idea yet. Looking back, I learned this wasn't just one lie Monica told, but a long, deliberate effort that stretched over years, with Ruth slowly sharing pieces of it whenever she could. Monica had carefully shaped a story for every holiday and family gathering, presenting herself as the heartbroken sister while quietly suggesting I was unstable, unreachable, or the one who walked away. She added small details here and there, telling relatives different versions until the lie felt real, convincing my parents that I had chosen to disappear and didn't care anymore. By doing that, she didn't need them to forget me, only to believe I had abandoned them, because that made their silence feel justified and kept her role secure. Much later, Nathan shared something he had held back for a long time, explaining that someone using a false name had once contacted my former hospital asking questions about my record and credibility, and the inquiry traced back to Hartford. The realization was chilling but clear. Monica had been searching for anything to support her version of events, any flaw she could point to, but she found nothing because there was nothing to find. There was nothing to uncover because I had done nothing wrong, and as I held my mug tightly, feeling the heat through it, I finally said out loud that this wasn't a single lie but a pattern. She had been tracking me for years. Nathan gently placed his hand over mine and told me this went far beyond normal sibling issues, and I knew he was right. Monica hadn't lied once and walked away. She had carefully built a long-term story piece by piece, making sure it stayed intact no matter what. Every holiday comment, every rumor shared quietly, and even fake inquiries were part of something carefully maintained over 5 years. I could have stepped in earlier, taken legal action, or forced the truth into the open, but I didn't, because life was about to expose everything in a way I never could have planned. It began in the early hours of a January morning when my pager went off just after 3 a.m., pulling me from deep sleep with an urgent trauma alert. I moved fast, dressed, and drove through dark, wet roads while running through the medical details in my head, doing what I had trained myself to do. When I arrived at the hospital and reviewed the incoming patient's chart, the name stopped me cold, and for a brief moment, the noise around me faded as old memories rushed back. I steadied myself, gave clear instructions to my team, and prepared the trauma bay, knowing that the sirens growing louder outside were bringing me face to face with the people I hadn't seen in 5 years. The ambulance doors swung open and the stretcher rolled in quickly, carrying Monica unconscious, strapped down with shallow breaths fogging her oxygen mask, blood staining her shirt, and one arm hanging limp over the side. The paramedics called out her vitals as they moved, explaining her dropping blood pressure and rising heart rate while 4 lines pushed fluids as fast as possible. Right behind them came my parents, rushing and disoriented, my mother looking suddenly older, hair thin and hands shaking as she whispered her daughter's name, my father pale and frantic as he demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. A nurse calmly guided them toward the waiting area, explaining that the chief surgeon was already handling the case, and when my father insisted, she glanced toward the trauma bay and briefly met my eyes, recognizing the name on my badge before I subtly shook my head. As my parents were led down the hall, I heard my father say she was all they had, words that cut deeper than any accusation because they erased me completely. Alone in the scrub room, I gave myself half a minute to breathe, staring at my own reflection in the steel mirror, feeling both detached and painfully aware of the impossible position I was in. I considered stepping away, letting someone else take over, but the reality was simple and unforgiving. The patient on the table was bleeding out and time was running out. I followed protocol, disclosed the conflict, documented everything, and ensured another surgeon was on standby, then walked into the operating room and focused only on the body in front of me. 4 hours I worked with calm precision, repairing severe internal damage step by step, my hands steady and my mind locked into the discipline that had carried me this far, while the room stayed quiet and focused, and the team watched me do exactly what I was trained to do. The residents always watch closely during my cases, but I could feel their focus tighten when the liver repair became complicated, and I knew there was no room for hesitation. I stayed steady because failure wasn't an option. At 6:48 in the morning, I placed the final stitch, her vital signs stabilized, and it was clear she was going to survive. Dr. Patel, who had quietly observed the entire operation, told me it was flawless and offered to speak with the family, but I declined, knowing this responsibility was mine. As I washed my hands, the familiar routine felt different, because something had shifted. I was no longer the daughter who had vanished years ago, but the surgeon who had just saved her sister's life. I took a breath and walked toward the waiting room, every step heavier than the last. When I entered, my parents were sitting there, exhausted and afraid, and my father stood up immediately to ask about Monica. until his eyes fell on my badge and then my face, and recognition hit him all at once. My mother followed a moment later, grabbing his arm in shock as silence filled the room. I calmly introduced myself as the chief of trauma surgery and explained that the operation had been successful and their daughter was stable, carefully addressing them by name, not as my parents. The realization began to unravel everything they believed, and when my mother tried to reach for me, I stepped back, clear and deliberate. As confusion and regret surfaced, I explained without anger or emotion that none of what they had been told was true, delivering the truth in the same controlled voice I use with every family, knowing that in that moment, 5 years of lies were finally collapsing under the weight of reality. No one spoke as the truth settled into the room, and through the glass behind me I could see staff members pause, their reactions giving away that they understood this moment mattered. My father tried to regain control out of habit, telling me this wasn't the time, but I calmly reminded him that I had just spent nearly 4 hours ensuring his other daughter survived, so I understood the situation very well. For the first time I could remember, he had no response, and the silence did the work that years of calls, letters, and explanations never could. I listed what I had done: emails with official paperwork, a handwritten letter returned unopened, calls ignored, Aunt Ruth dismissed, not as an accusation, but as simple facts that needed no emotion behind them. When a nurse interrupted to pass along a routine message about an internal professional recognition tied to the surgery, the weight of it landed harder than anyone expected, and I excused myself to return to my duties. Hours later, during a standard ICU check, I found Monica awake and watching me, recognition draining the color from her face as she read my badge and realized who I was and what I had become. I explained her condition calmly and professionally, and as understanding spread across her face, I saw the familiar shift as she tried to calculate her way out of the moment. When she said she could explain, I told her she didn't need to explain anything to me, and gently pointed out that the people waiting outside were the ones who needed to hear the truth. Now that I finished updating Monica's chart, checked her drains, and left the room without saying anything else, because I didn't need to stay to know what would follow, and neither did the ICU staff who could hear everything through the thin walls. Let me pause here for a moment and ask you this. What do you think Monica told our parents when they walked into that room? Did she finally tell the truth, repeat the lie, or turn herself into the victim again? If you guess she played the victim, you already understand her. According to Linda, who heard it from the ICU nurse, Monica began crying the second our parents entered, insisting she never meant for things to go so far and claiming she had only been trying to protect me. My father confronted her with the facts. My mother asked flatly whether the calls and letters were real, and each question chipped away at the story they had believed for years. When Monica realized denial wouldn't hold, she shifted tactics, accusing me of abandoning the family, only for my father to finally say out loud that they had blocked me because she told them to. The room fell apart in that moment, and Monica for the first time had nothing prepared. Then Aunt Ruth arrived, calm and resolved, carrying 5 years of proof, emails, official documents, graduation photos, and a message from Monica herself telling Ruth to stay silent so our parents wouldn't be confused. As Ruth laid everything out, the truth filled the room completely, leaving Monica exposed and my parents forced to face not just the lie, but the fact that they had allowed it because believing it had been easier than questioning her. No one argued anymore because there was nothing left to debate, and my mother slowly sank into the chair beside the bed, no longer looking at Monica but scrolling through Aunt Ruth's phone, reading my emails one by one as her lips moved silently. She stopped on the last message I had sent the night before my residency graduation, the one where I told her I had finished my training, wished she had been there, and reminded her that I was still her daughter and always had been. That was when she folded inward, not crying loudly, but breaking in a way that comes from realizing a mistake can never truly be undone, while my father stood at the window with his back to the room, shoulders shaking as he cried for the first time in his life. According to Ruth, Monica lay quietly staring at the ceiling, with no performance left to give and no story left that anyone would believe, as everything she had built finally collapsed. When I returned later that afternoon after a long shift, my parents were still there, exhausted and shaken, and my mother rushed to apologize, only for me to calmly stop her and explain that apologies are a beginning, not a solution, and that what I needed was time. I told them clearly that I was no longer the daughter they had dismissed years ago, but someone who had built a full life on her own, and that if they wanted to be part of it now, it would happen on my terms. My father nodded quietly, understanding without arguing, and when I addressed Monica, I made it clear that for now she was only my patient, nothing more. I left without looking back, knowing the door wasn't closed forever, but that I alone would decide when, how, and for whom it might open again. 2 weeks later, after Monica was discharged, I agreed to meet her at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes, with my husband nearby for support. And when she walked in looking thinner and worn down, it was clear that while her body was healing, the rest of her still had a long way to go. The confidence she used to carry so effortlessly was completely gone, and for the first time I could remember, my older sister looked her actual age, tired and exposed. She sat across from me, hands wrapped around a coffee she never touched, eyes fixed on the table as if it might give her answers. I skipped any warm-up and told her calmly that I wasn't there to shout or recount every lie, because she already knew what she had done, and all I wanted to understand was why. After a long stretch of silence broken only by cafe noises, she finally admitted that she couldn't handle watching me become everything she felt she never was. And I let that truth sit because it was the first honest thing she had said to me in years. She apologized and I accepted that she meant it, but I made it clear that apologies don't return lost time, don't fix missed milestones, and don't erase being treated like I no longer existed. Then she confessed that she had even tried to interfere with my medical career by contacting my school, and while it shocked me, I explained that the truth protected me, not favoritism. I told her I wasn't cutting her out, but I was setting firm rules, starting with her correcting every lie she told our family in writing, and she agreed without argument. The following week I met my parents and told them rebuilding was possible only if they committed to counseling and real change, not excuses. And while my father resisted at first, he finally gave in. Before leaving, I reminded them that some moments couldn't be undone, but the future was still theirs to earn through steady effort, not emotional speeches. A month later, standing in a crowded ballroom as I was honored for my work, I realized that while I had once nearly walked away from everything, I was now surrounded by people who chose me, supported me, and stood with me when it mattered most. I glanced toward the back of the ballroom and saw 2 seats that Ruth had quietly saved. And there sat my parents, my mother in a simple navy dress she likely bought just for that night, and my father wearing a tie he clearly disliked, both sitting stiffly, with their hands folded, looking at me with faces that showed regret and pride mixed together in a way that was impossible to ignore. As I spoke, I said that sometimes the people you are born into don't arrive on time, but they do arrive, and in that moment my mother covered her mouth while my father stood up as applause filled the room. After the event, my father approached Nathan near the coat check, stood there for a long pause, and quietly admitted he owed him an apology, saying he should have been the one standing beside me, and Nathan, calm and respectful as always, shook his hand and replied that while many things should have been different, what mattered was that we were here now, and my father held on to that handshake longer than necessary, his eyes red. A few days later, Monica sent a detailed email to the entire family, which Ruth confirmed went to all 47 people. And I didn't read it until the next morning when Nathan brought me coffee and gently set my laptop on the table, giving me space without saying a word. The message was short, direct, and honest, admitting she had lied about my leaving medical school, created false information, kept the story going for 5 years, and intentionally blocked my parents from learning the truth, ending by clearly stating that I never abandoned the family and that the damage was her responsibility alone. The reactions came slowly and unevenly, with some relatives calling in tears, others sending brief messages of disappointment, and my grandmother calling me herself to apologize for believing the story and to express her anger at being misled for so long. And I told her there was nothing to forgive because we had all been misinformed. No one publicly turned against Monica, but something more lasting changed as invitations stopped coming and replies grew quiet, because people no longer trusted her. And for someone who had relied on trust her entire life, that silence spoke loudly. In February, my parents began counseling with a firm but fair therapist, and while my mother opened up quickly and faced her role in staying silent, my father struggled, answering briefly and resisting reflection, until it became clear that his pride had helped lock the situation in place, and his decision not to question it had allowed it to grow, though his willingness to keep attending sessions was its own kind of progress. A few weeks later, my mother sent me a handwritten letter taking responsibility not only for believing the lie but for choosing comfort over fairness and avoiding conflict when I needed support. And I read it quietly at the kitchen table, held on to it for a long time, and placed it carefully with other meaningful reminders of my past. Monica also began her own therapy, something she mentioned awkwardly during one of our short coffee meetings, each one tense but gradually more honest, until she finally admitted she wasn't sure she deserved forgiveness but wanted to change, and I told her that words alone were not enough and that time would be the real proof. She accepted that without pushing, which was new, and while I can't say yet whether I fully trust her, I do believe that change is possible, and for now that belief is all I am willing to give. The mark on her left upper abdomen would fade from red to white over the next year. Every time she got dressed, every time she caught her reflection, she'd see the scar left by the sister who had once tried to erase her. But when it mattered most, that sister had chosen her oath over anger, steady hands over old grudges. I carry those 5 years of silence in my memory, lodged deep inside me. In the strangest way, we were even, two sisters finding balance through pain. Maybe with enough time and quiet effort we could reach something new, something real. I'm sitting in my office at Mercy Crest late at night. The hallway is still, the kind of quiet that comes after the last visitors leave but before the night shift energy begins. My nameplate is on the door, diplomas on the wall. Not for me but for the residents. On my desk, a framed wedding photo. Nathan, Maggie, and Ruth, 30 guests, a backyard in October light. My parents aren't in that picture, but on a nearby shelf sits a new photo from 3 weeks ago. Mom and Dad on my front porch, coats on, slightly unsure, trying to smile. It's awkward, imperfect, but it's real. If you see yourself in this story, whether silenced or the one doing the silencing, here's what I learned. The truth doesn't expire. It comes when it's needed most. I didn't seek revenge on my sister. I didn't need to. Living fully on my terms became the response that mattered. And if you're waiting for your family to finally see you, stop waiting. See yourself first. Build your life with people who show up. When others turn around, let them find a door you control. You decide when it opens, how wide, and who walks through. That isn't revenge. It's structure. It's a Sunday morning, first week of February. Light snow falls outside the window, just enough to soften the world. I'm making French toast. Nathan is grinding coffee beans, singing off-key to the radio. EPO waits under the table, hopeful for crumbs. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands and open the door. Mom and Dad stand on the porch, winter coats on. Dad holds a bottle of orange juice like he's unsure what to do. Mom carries a tin of homemade cookies. The shortbread she used to make for Monica, never for me. Hi, Mom says, nervous. Come in, I reply. Coffee is nearly ready. Dad steps inside, eyes scanning the kitchen, taking in a life he almost never knew existed. Can I help with anything? He asks. I point. You can set the table, Dad. He nods, takes out 4 plates and sets them down carefully as if they might break. Nathan hands him coffee. Mom hugs me quietly at the stove, forehead against mine, no words. Io thumps his tail. Snow falls. The French toast sizzles. It isn't perfect. It isn't the childhood I wanted or the reconciliation movies promise. But it's real. And real is more than I've had for a very long time. I'm Dr. Irene Ulett, 32 years old, and I'm slowly, carefully letting myself be someone's daughter again. 4 plates. It's a start. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about family, boundaries, or lost connections, leave a comment. What would you have done? Would you have opened that door? And if you want more stories like this, check the description for another one I think you'll love. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about life, family,